Many of us feel that we are in need.
We are from the start categorized by our work.
People also expect me to speak Chinese because I look East Asian.
We also share a lot of similarities.
Do you feel like you belong here? Can you call this country your home? And if not, do you think you'll ever be able to call it home? I've had the opportunity to meet many foreign students while studying in China. And when you sit down and have a deep conversation about living in China, one of the recurring themes is the struggle to find sense of belonging in here. But at the same time, I met many other foreigners who see China as their second home. So what are people doing differently? Where do we get our sense of belonging from? In this episode of China University Podcast, we'll be exploring some of the ways and approaches that foreign students use to build a sense of belonging in China. Whether you're currently studying or working in China or planning to move here in the future, this episode is sure to provide valuable insights and advice on how to feel at home in this fascinating and dynamic country. So sit back, relax, and join me as we delve into the topic of sense of belonging in China. Welcome to China University. This is Chimsy, your student advisor. In this podcast, I will not only talk about the many professional, academic, and personal growth opportunities this country has to offer, but also I'll mention some of the major obstacles foreign students encounter while living in China. I'll share my experience, thoughts, and opinions along with some realistic advice and genuine encouragement. Don't forget to like, comment, and share this episode to help this podcast become more relevant and reach more people. You can listen to full episodes on Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts, where you can find me as China University Student Advisor. You can also follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube as China University Podcast, and on Twitter as China Uni Podcast. What is sense of belonging? Sense of belonging refers to the feeling of being accepted, valued, and included in a particular social group, community, or any other environment. It really helps to shape your identity and self-worth. In my opinion, developing a sense of belonging in a new and unfamiliar environment can be very challenging, and you'll see why in a minute, especially for international students since they're far away from home, friends, and family. But why exactly is sense of belonging important for international students? Man, look, having a sense of belonging is crucial for you, not only for your overall well-being, but also for your academic success. It has been proven multiple times that when students feel connected and supported, they are more likely to be motivated, engaged, and committed to their studies. On the other hand, when students feel isolated and disconnected, they may experience a range of negative emotions such as homesickness, loneliness, and anxiety, which can have a detrimental effect on their mental health and academic performance. Research has shown that international students who have a quote-unquote strong sense of belonging are more likely to adapt well to their new environment, build social networks, and develop a positive attitude towards their host country. And just in case you think I'm pulling all these facts off my butt, I left the link to the research paper in the description of this episode. But, it's not hard to believe that having a sense of belonging has a positive impact on people in general. The article is titled Comparative Effects of Belongingness on the Academic Success and Cross-Cultural Interactions of Domestic and International Students. According to the article, international students who have a deep sense of belonging are also more likely to participate in extracurricular activities, seek out new experiences, and explore different aspects of the local culture. In short, having a sense of belonging can help international students to thrive in their new environment and make the most of their study abroad experience. But developing a sense of belonging is not always easy, especially when students are faced with cultural, linguistic, and social barriers. To be honest, I think that many international students in China feel like outsiders or struggle to connect with Chinese people and even other fellow foreigners, which can lead to feelings of isolation and loneliness. We foreigners may also encounter encounter stereotypes or discrimination based on our ethnicity, nationality, or physical appearance, which can make anyone feel unwelcome and excluded. And foreigners may also encounter stereotypes or discrimination based on our ethnicity, nationality, or physical appearance. And this can come from any person. It can be a Chinese person or a foreigner even. And man, obviously this can make anyone feel unwelcome and excluded. This is why I think it's so important for universities and host communities to create a welcoming and inclusive environment for all international students. And while there are many universities in China that have achieved this inclusive environment through various initiatives such as orientation programs, language partners, cultural exchange programs, and mentorships, the reality is that not all universities in China are created equal, and organizing activities for the foreign students might not be within their priorities, which is a real shame because I think that by providing opportunities for international students to connect with their peers and other Chinese students, they will feel valued and supported. And universities can rely more on the word of mouth to promote their own institution abroad instead of relying so much on those photos of foreigners holding teddy bears or those scripted videos of non-Asian students speaking Mandarin. Now, in the next part of this episode, I will talk about some factors that made it very easy, but also very hard for me to develop a sense of belonging in China. You'll also listen to a few foreigners sharing their own views and feelings about their own sense of belonging in China. All right, let me share my personal experience of developing a sense of belonging in China. Well, when I first arrived here, it didn't take long for me to start seeing China as my home. Even when everything appeared foreign to me, there was also something familiar and comforting about it all. Like many other foreigners, I was absolutely mesmerized by everything around me. Oh man, that novelty, that freshness had an intoxicating effect on me. It was my China honeymoon, and I have to admit that I really miss those days. I remember I would walk around the streets of Nanjing and marvel at the fact that I was actually living in such a magical place. I couldn't resist taking photos of every single building and street vendor that would catch my eye. I also made a concerted effort to befriend every single Chinese person and foreigner I would come across. My British friend Ed even coined a term for it, China Immortality Syndrome, which eventually evolved into the well-known acronym Chimsy. If you look up Chimsy, Chimsy, on Google, you'll find that the Urban Dictionary defines it as an adjective that refers to the euphoria or delusions of grandeur that lead some expats to behave chaotically when living in China. The first usage example is Mark has been acting a little chimsy these days. Last night he bought drinks for everyone at the bar. Now, this one sentence is very dear to me because when I wrote it, I was thinking about that eternal sense of happiness and excitement that highlights the beauty in all the things that are happening around you during your first months in China. You're at the bar or club, your serotonin reaches schizophrenic levels, and you all of a sudden feel like paying for everyone's drinks with your scholarship money. Oh boy, during my honeymoon phase in China, I found it the easiest to feel at home, if I'm being honest with you. And Chinese people made it even easier by showing their traditional and most typical trait, which is their unconditional hospitality. But let me tell you, the real challenge, at least for me, was to develop a sense of belonging after my honeymoon phase, when you no longer idealize China, but you begin to see it for what it is. A country like any other, with good and bad things, with good and bad people that have good and bad habits. It took me around, like 2 years to fully process this fact and accept the reality of this place in order not to become the cynical, angry foreigner, which I so well portrayed in episode number 4, Expectations in China. Now, some foreigners find this sense of belonging in China by, renting a nice, cozy apartment with a nice view, taking dancing classes or painting lessons, going to bars and clubs, or, by only hanging out with people of the same ethnic background, Koreans hanging out with Koreans, Russians hanging out with Russians, Africans with Africans, Europeans with Europeans, and so forth. I guess it's just natural human behavior. Yeah. But for me, I had to go out of my way to seek a long-lasting sense of belonging. But fortunately, that search led me to places I never imagined. And it allowed me to come across amazing Chinese people with amazing life stories and foreigners with diverse backgrounds that I would have never had the chance to meet back home. There were some experiences in China that made it very challenging for me to feel like I belonged here. For instance, I would often find myself being photographed by Chinese people in the street or hearing them call out Lao Wai in public. Now, don't get me wrong, I wasn't bothered by this for the first 600 times it happened, but eventually it started to make me feel like a monkey at the zoo. But after 7 years in China, I've become somewhat numb to this kind of behavior and it doesn't bother me anymore. Nowadays, I just ignore it, smile back, or take pictures of them as a joke. Another obstacle to my sense of belonging in China was when Chinese workers or staff members would assume that my Chinese sucked and would switch to speaking English without even asking if I spoke Chinese. And look, I understand that they're trying to be helpful and it's probably more convenient for them and for you, but it can feel a little patronizing, you know? It feels like they're treating you like a child. You know, that feeling, right? Imagine going to a restaurant or store in your country and the person working at the counter greets you like, "Hello, little buddy. Is your mommy with you?" Okay, all right. I admit that was a bit of a disproportionate analogy, but you get the idea. There were times when I faced personal and superficial questions about my financial status or marital status and comments about my body that, even though I laughed them off for the first 100 times, eventually made me feel uncomfortable and insecure. And then there's the issue of foreign exclusive red tape at places like the bank or post office that continues to be frustrating for me. It's just as aggravating to encounter apps or online services that only offer the option to use Chinese IDs to register. For example, while online appointment booking is a common convenience for Chinese residents, I found that I couldn't make hospital appointments online because there was no passport option available. Instead, I had to physically go to the hospital to make an appointment. I'm not sure if this is the norm for all Chinese hospitals, but it's been the case in the few I've visited. The same goes for the yellow public bikes and the student discounts at the train stations. Maybe there's a reason for this, or maybe they just forgot about the foreigners, or maybe they still think we're in the Qing dynasty when seeing foreigners in China was a rare occurrence. Who knows? Even though there were some obstacles, I had some amazing experiences that helped me feel more at home in China. For instance, forming friendships with Chinese people who treat you like any other person can be extremely rewarding. Don't get me wrong, it's nice when Chinese people are welcoming and friendly to foreigners, but you know what? True friends tease each other, and I finally found Chinese friends who would roast me and not be surprised when I spoke Chinese to them. It's an incredible feeling, especially when you meet Chinese friends who have a great sense of humor and appreciate sarcasm. If you ever come across a Chinese friend with these qualities, treasure that friendship as if it were your last, because making Chinese friends and building meaningful relationships with them is hard, especially if your Mandarin sucks and their English sucks too. But if your Chinese friends considered you a friend or a best friend, that's it, man. You're the chosen one and your Chinese friend will be loyal to death. And listen, this applies to foreign friends too, of course. Seeing new faces in the streets and having foreign friends can turn any city into a cosmopolitan hub. It not only provides expats with a stronger sense of belonging, but it also a greater sense of normalcy. Being in China doesn't feel that weird when you see foreigners doing life, especially after the last 3 years when the borders were closed and foreigners were scarce in China. Now, the thing is that having Chinese friends has its perks. Chances are that your Chinese friend will invite you to their hometown and introduce you to their family, and that's a really good opportunity to connect with even more Chinese people. Before you know, you're participating in traditional Chinese weddings, playing mahjong with a group of eyes, drinking baijiu with random shushus, spending Chinese New Year watching TV with a Chinese family, and square dancing with your neighbors. It's priceless, man. Chinese friends are experts at making you feel at home in their home, and I think that has been one of the major factors that contributed to the steady development of my sense of belonging in China. But let's shift the focus away from here for a bit. What factors allowed you to develop a sense of belonging in China, or, on the contrary, what factors prevented you from developing a sense of belonging in China? The responses I've received were amazing, and it made me realize that everyone's experience in China is unique and personal. First off, we have Jordan from the US who graduated from college in China and now works here.
First, having an operational level of Chinese to help you explore different spaces in China. For example, I love exploring because I take photography and like to discover small coffee shops. And eventually, you find a couple that are really meaningful to you, and you keep that as your kind of main place of belonging. And through those constant communications between people of similar interests, you start to develop a sense of belonging. I find it difficult for workers, people in general, both Chinese and international people, to find a sense of belonging because we, from the start, are categorized by our work. So what we do, our job, and our personhood is interrelated. And that's a problem because work does not represent our totality, does not represent who we are completely. So the phrase would be level the playing field. How can we do that for ourselves? First, we can have that operational level of Chinese to allow people who only speak Chinese to share with us. That levels the playing field. Number two would be to find those spaces that are just for pleasure or for sharing. So an example would be a very small coffee shop, and if you go there again and again and again, yes, you might spend some money, but during the downtime when maybe there's not a lot of customers, you get to talk and share with other people your story. That can give you a sense of belonging, is that you are valued because you are there and you are ready to just allow yourself to be open to the potentialities.
Wow, I think I could make an entire episode talking about all the Chinese people I connected with at coffee shops. That's great advice. The opportunities to connect are really there, seriously. Even though sometimes you have to go out of your way to meet and connect with strangers in China. But you know what? Sometimes you gotta adopt this Wu Wei approach and do nothing, and the opportunities to meet new Chinese friends will arise. Next up is Bujing from Mongolia, which, by the way, is the second country with the most episode downloads and listeners for my podcast for some reason. Anyway, thank you, people from Mongolia. Let's hear what Bujing has to say.
Living in China has been interesting with both good and bad moments, but the international community, particularly in Shanghai, helped me feel like I belonged here. In Shanghai, there are people from all over the world facing similar challenges, and seeing other people deal with the same challenges made me feel less alone. But I have to admit, not being able to speak the language has been difficult. It has been tough for me to express myself and connect with the locals, which I think is a major factor preventing me from developing a sense of belonging in China. People also expect me to speak Chinese because I look East Asian, and they become irritated when they discover that I don't. And I can sense their dissatisfaction and frustration, which makes the language barrier issue much more difficult, and it's something that I have to deal with every day.
Oh man, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but many times I fantasized about being Asian, just so that I don't get all this Laowai attention. But I get annoyed when Chinese people expect me to suck at Chinese and speak to me in English. But I can see how frustrating it must be for people with East Asian features to deal with these kind of assumptions. Oh well, let's move on to Pedro from Brazil.
Coming from Rio, Brazil, I would like to highlight two factors that make me have a strong sense of belonging here in China. First factor is the care and kindness of the Chinese people. I have been living here in Shanghai for approximately 3 months, and at least in my experience, the Chinese people have always been extremely friendly to me. So despite some cultural differences, I find that we also share a lot of similarities, and this in turn helps me to connect with the people, with the culture, and bring this sense of belonging. Meanwhile, the second factor for me is connected to this somewhat chaotic element of life here. And don't get me wrong, I say this in a positive way because public services work and the city is well structured and all, but at the same time you see bikes and scooters moving from place to place very quickly, and you go to a restaurant and you see people eating, enjoying food, sometimes talking very loudly and sometimes even shouting to call another person. And there is always something new happening either in study or work or social life. So I find this dynamism very engaging and it reminds me a bit of home. So basically I'm really loving life here.
Once again, wow, thank you very much. Hearing this was particularly refreshing. And to be honest with you, if I had heard something like this many years ago, I would have been a little cynical about it, especially after hearing that you've only spent 3 months in China. But now, 7 years later, is rather refreshing to hear. It's nice to hear what China feels like from someone who just came here. I genuinely miss those times in China when every day felt like an adventure. All right, finally, we have Elena from Moldova.
Hi, I'm Elena. I'm from Moldova. Speaking of this topic, I would categorize it into 3 stages. Stage 1, before coming to China. When I was 7 years old, I got inspired by the Chinese characters. The uniqueness of this language made me dream to come to China, to learn the language and learn more about their culture. So that made me feel that I already belong here. Stage 2, starting to live in China. I would characterize China as another world. Everything is different here, and this type of feeling led the young people feel more curious and want to explore more. Here I also included opportunities. As a young foreigner, I got many opportunities to develop myself, and was very important for a young person to be supported in doing what he's interested. This is another reason that many of us feel that we are in need, like we belong here. Stage 3, living in China for a long time. Well, in my case, I was living in China for 13 years. I basically grew up here. I become mature through the Chinese culture. This is why sometimes it's hard for me to understand some social situation from my country. So if you stay for a long time in China, the lifestyle and the environment will change you, and this will be another reason that will let you feel like you belong here.
Man, 13 years in China? That really put things into perspective. She spent almost double the amount of time in China that I have. I think that after being in China for such a long time, 13 years, I guess that everything stops looking foreign to you and it becomes the norm. But I wonder, after literally growing up in China and spending such a long time here, if you ever moved back, do you think you'd struggle to find a sense of belonging back home? Finally, I want to end this episode with some words of encouragement for all international students out there who may be struggling to find their place in China. Look, it's true that living in a foreign country can be daunting at times, but it's also an incredible opportunity for personal growth and cultural exchange. Don't be afraid to step out of your comfort zone. Try new things. Seriously, make meaningful connections with the people around you. I can guarantee you that it will definitely contribute to a steady development of sense of belonging. Alright, I always like to finish my episodes with a meaningful quote, and today's quote is by the renowned American author and research professor Brené Brown. She said, "Belonging is being part of something bigger than yourself, but it's also the courage to stand alone and to belong to yourself above all else." I think that's a powerful statement that speaks to the complexity of belonging. It's not just about fitting in with others, but also about having the courage to be true to yourself and your own identity. And who knows, maybe after experiencing life abroad and adapting to new cultures, you might find that you struggle to find a sense of belonging back home. Alright, that's it for today. In the next episode, I will talk about academic failure in China, because it's a topic that affects many foreign students. We'll discuss the high pressure and expectations placed on the students, the impact of academic failure on mental health, and the differences in education systems between China and other countries. So stay tuned for that. But before I let you go, don't forget to like, comment, and share this episode to help this podcast become more relevant and reach more people. You can listen to full episodes on Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts, where you can find me as China University Student Advisor. You can also follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube as China University Podcast, and on Twitter as China Uni Podcast. Thank you for listening. This was Chimsy, your student advisor. See you next time.